Sataguchi. Absolutely. How's your weekend? Thursday, right?
Yeah, so I went up there and you guys just I got late trains on. Just been in the
How was the train?
I got to see the Oh, really? Is there anything to do with swipe right? That's it.
Only thing it has to do with. Now we've been talking about it. It's been great.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of hit it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, the only person who met her was Aaron. And Melissa stuck in the elevator.
Oh, was it? We usually do
Yeah.
like,
No, I was like, yeah. Don't know what etiquette I'm supposed to be adhering to, but this is what I use.
it's not all
Yes. I mean, I have no opinion. Everyone's like, it's very boring.
Basically, every time I work out, now something else hurts.
have a local show.
Yeah, last 2 weeks ago,
She
this
does
week, now
outreach for an environmental NGO.
No, it's not. I actually had this before.
Well, I mean,
I was risking it by going and doing this exercises for 5 feet apart, and we were supposed to jump on the weights like a little bunny rabbit. They were way too apart, and we just had to play with us. But I guess a lot of people miss. Yeah, a lot of people did. Not fall, but just not making the weight then. Never get on the edge of the weight. I will. Good mental practice. It's indicative of my feeling about work.
Depends what your definition of exciting is.
Good job, Tom.
That's great. I grabbed a couple of them.
You filmed it already?
Yeah. I ate one yesterday.
You're like, oh shit.
Sure.
It's wedge shaped.
No, it's wet shaped, yeah.
I mean, pizza doesn't really go off. So it's the miniature.
Yeah. Well, this is my it's a 3-year shelf life. No, I'm here with a guy.
No, really.
No, but it's strange eating an MRE like outside, even every day. It's fine. You eat like one right? It's terrible. But people find it good.
I mean, that's nothing compared to.
Good. I don't think this was good either. Bend it down. Yeah, you can use that. Like you can put it in the green sleeve with the rock or something.
Yeah, you know.
But,
I think I feel like
You can leave anything in these rooms, they will eventually get eaten.
no. Yes.
You can run a badger over on the way into work.
Yeah.
Bring it in.
Like,
Yeah, it's still twitching.
Y'all mind?
Morning, everybody. Hope you having a good day. Thanks for being here for our latest Senior Leader Counter ISIL briefing. Today we're pleased to have Lieutenant General Charles Brown. He's the commander of U.S. Air Force's Central Command and the Combined Forces Air Component Commander for Operation Inherent Resolve. He's joining us today from the Coalition Air Operations Center in Qatar, and be able to provide us an update on the air campaign in Iraq and Syria. He's going to have an opening statement, then we'll open it up for some Q&A back here in the room. And just as a reminder, he won't be able to see you all, so if you could identify yourselves, your news organization, that would be helpful. I'll help with getting questioners here. And he also plans to play some video, which you'll be able to see here as well. And those videos will be accessible to you all after this briefing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant General Brown. And sir, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everyone. Let me go ahead and start with my opening statement, and I'll be prepared to take your questions. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and on behalf of the men and women of the more than 60 nations who are dedicated and united as a coalition supporting Operation Inherent Resolve. As Peter said, I'm Lieutenant General C.Q. Brown, Jr. I'm the commander for U.S. Air Force's Central Command and the Combined Forces Air Component Commander for CENTCOM. As the CFAC, I'm responsible for developing contingency plans and conducting air operations for not only Operation Inherent Resolve, but for Central Command's 20-nation area of responsibility covering Central and Southwest Asia. I'm extremely honored to lead and be a part of a 19-nation air coalition that is committed to defeating Daesh while helping set the conditions for improved security and stability in the region. Now, each coalition nation brings its own unique capability to the air campaign against Daesh, but it is the interoperability between our nations, which is built upon years of combined training and multilateral exercises, that has been key to our continued success in the air campaign. There is no doubt coalition air power has and continues to dramatically degrade Daesh's ability to fight and conduct operations. The coalition's persistent air coverage continually exploits Daesh's weaknesses, and we are more effective today than ever before. We're conducting the most precise air campaign in history, and we're able to attrit Daesh and its capabilities anytime and anywhere. As the coalition has garnered greater understanding of the enemy, our air power effects have evolved, and it is clear that air power is a vital element in this fight. In fact, coalition airstrikes have been increasingly effective at targeting Daesh's critical capabilities. Now, over the past 6 months, we've seen the number of weapons released continue to exceed the campaign monthly average. And when matched with an increased understanding of Daesh, the coalition is able to strike more lucrative targets to great effect. Logistics, command and control, and weapons manufacturing are areas we've had increased success in targeting Daesh. In fact, we've had notable success in targeting Daesh's financial resources. Successful strikes on oil facilities and on monetary centers have resulted in Daesh cutting the pay to their fighters and increased the amount of money available to conduct and fund their operations. On February 13th, we targeted and destroyed 5 financial targets in the heart of Mosul. Let me show you a video that includes 3 of the 5 strikes. Could you, Divich, could you go ahead and please play the video? Okay. So this is a strike with U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy aircraft that took out these finance targets in less than 5 minutes using precision-guided munitions to minimize collateral damage and the risk to civilians. These strikes on financial storage and distribution centers were conducted in order to disrupt Daesh's illicit financial operations. To date, the coalition has expended 519 weapons and conducted 119 strikes on these bulk cache sites, gas and oil separation plants, and crude oil collection points. Okay, and another set of strikes that were just executed involved 8 coalition nations. During this particular operation, the objective of the coalition airstrike was to restrict Daesh's movement throughout the Euphrates River Valley. The coalition employed 77 precision-guided munitions, striking Daesh's command and control, logistics, and sanctuary areas in Al-Qaim, Iraq, and Abu Kamal, Syria, destroying all the intended targets. I'd now like to share a video from that operation that shows a coalition strike on a weapons storage facility. Divots, can you play this video, please? Now, our UK and Saudi partners performed this particular strike. Here in a moment, when this video comes up, you'll see the weapons impact just above the crosshairs. Now, for this particular strike, there were 4 precision-guided munitions successfully destroying the weapons storage facility and limiting Daesh's ability to resupply their fighters. Okay, thank you. Additionally, as you heard yesterday during the press briefing by Colonel Warren, we continue to support ground operations. The recent successes of the Iraqi security forces in clearing Ramadi comes after months of supporting ground forces with close air support. Ramadi is not the only success, though. Airstrikes have been vital in partner force operations to take back Sinjar in northern Iraq and Asaka and Tizreen Dam in Syria. Now, we will continue our pressure on Daesh, and we continue to go after these key targets. And as our intelligence on Daesh improves, each strike will have increasingly detrimental impacts on Daesh. Persistent air power has halted Daesh, forced the enemy to change their tactics, and enable partner forces to regain the initiative. We are making progress in the defeat of Daesh. Daesh leaders and fighters are disappearing in large numbers, and they fear air power. This is due to our operational reach and flexibility, our precision and lethality, and our constant presence and responsiveness. We will continue delivering air power to destroy and eventually defeat Daesh. And with that, Peter, I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you, sir. As a former broadcaster myself, I'm going to ask one favor, sir. If you could just slide your chair, if possible, a little bit to your left, just so we get a cleaner shot of you with the camera, that'd be great. That's great, sir. Perfect. Much better. Broadcasters, everyone happy with that? Let me begin here. Begin with Tony Capaccio here.
Hey, so Tony Capaccio with Bloomberg News. Broad question. There's been a lot of campaign rhetoric around the country from Ted Cruz, the presidential candidate, on carpet bombing ISIL. From your perspective, is that the accurate, or is that the most correct way to view the use of air power against ISIL? If not, why not? I had a follow-up.
Sure, Tony. Carpet bombing is not effective for the way the operation we're actually executing, because we're using precision-guided munitions on a regular basis. And Daesh doesn't necessarily mass itself where you could actually even use that kind of tactic, and that's a tactic that is really not effective for the fight we're actually executing today. And so using the GPS-guided munitions, carpet bombing is not effective. And on top of that, as you look at the law around conflict and us trying to minimize civilian casualties, carpet bombing is just, in my opinion, not the way to go.
Can I ask a follow-up? Have ISIL personnel in recent months, have they actually presented targets that you could have carpet bombed if you wanted to? I mean, is that a tactic they've even been able to employ, just mass formations at night in the open?
Not necessarily, because if you look at a lot of our campaign is they've been putting themselves in areas where there's population centers, and there are places in the open desert where they're out and about, but they don't mass. So carpet bombing is not effective, and really with the precision we do have, we can drop 1 or 2 munitions in an area and actually do the job without having to do carpet bombing.
Next question, David Martin.
Hi, Dave Martin with CBS. What communications have you had with the Russians about staying away from areas where U.S.-backed opposition forces are fighting on the ground in Syria?
Well, we've not had very specific conversations with the Russians because, we do have an MOU with the Russians, the coalition does, and it's really focused on air safety. And so, we do know, and they understand where we fly, and we understand where they fly, but we haven't had specific conversations about, at least at my level or with the folks I have here in the KAOC, with the Russians on that topic.
So you have not told them at your level that they should not attack targets located in such and such an area?
Well, there are some areas that we have talked to them about, and that's really where we have some of our coalition forces, particularly as you look around up in northern Syria. And so we have talked to them about that. But when it comes to the other forces, we don't necessarily dive into those type of details, but they understand where we're going to operate. And they have asked us, but we don't get into details with them about that.
Hi, General. This is Courtney Cubey from NBC News. Can you give us sort of a look ahead what you see is going to happen tomorrow when the cessation of hostilities is supposed to go into effect? How do you see that affecting your job and the air campaign?
Well, if you go back to the discussion on the cessation of hostilities, it does not stop operations against Daesh or ISIL. So we will continue to go after Daesh and ISIL. Now, what I will also tell you, though, the areas where you look at where most of the humanitarian aid is going is areas that we're not operating in. When you talk about Aleppo and the like, and that's we're not striking that area. We have not struck in that area, and we have no intention really to fly in that area because that's not where Daesh is. So from our perspective, it doesn't impact us.
If I could ask one other on northern Syria, there have been I think it's 4 or 5 days in a row now that the Turkey has shelled some Kurds in northern Syria, and then there was the attack in Ankara, which the Turks are blaming on the Syrian Kurds. Has the U.S. or the coalition been asked to support those Syrian Kurds in any way from the air? Have there been any efforts to back them up or to provide any air power for them recently?
Well, I mean, when you look at the Syrian Kurds and you look at the Syrian Democratic Force, there are Syrian Kurds, but there's also Syrian Arabs and Syrian Christians, a part of the Syrian Democratic Force that we support. In this particular case, the folks we are supporting are the folks that are fighting against ISIL, and so there is air support for Syrian Kurds, but under the umbrella of the Syrian Democratic Force.
Tom?
General Tom Bowman with NPR. I wonder if you could talk a bit about Mosul. I know there have been a number of airstrikes up there over the past weeks and months. Talk about what your ISR is picking up there as far as defensive measures on the part of ISIS, possible number of fighters, the challenges it take to take back that city from what you're seeing through ISR. And also there's more talk about creating a no-fly zone up in northern Syria. Angela Merkel's been talking about it. Just talk in broad terms about the challenges in setting up a no-fly zone.
Okay, let me take your first question. For Mosul, what we end up seeing around not only Mosul but other locations throughout Iraq and Syria is Daesh tends to put up either T-walls or does berming to put great defensive positions. In places like Mosul, though, what they do is they wrap themselves inside the population center by where they operate. And I will tell you that some of our strikes here, most recently, and the bank strikes, is that we had bank strikes just this past weekend, and two in January, really in downtown Mosul to be. And I think we surprised Daesh because we're able to do very precise weaponeering in order to strike and then also minimize civilian casualties. So I think that's been effective. To go to your second question on the no-fly zone, when I look at a no-fly zone, you got to be willing to do a couple things. You got to be willing to shoot somebody down to execute a no-fly zone, and that would dramatically escalate the situation we already have because it's already as complex as it is. The other piece that I look at is if we do a no-fly zone, we take much of our air power now to enforce a no-fly zone, and that air power is no longer focused on defeating Daesh, and so it comes at a cost. And so that's why, from my personal opinion, a no-fly zone will be difficult to do, and it takes away from our, my priority mission that I've been given to do.
I mean, you clearly have more aircraft in the Air Force and in the Marines as well. Couldn't it possibly be done? I mean, if your Commander-in-Chief came today and said, "I want you to start a no-fly zone," what would you say?
Well, I will tell you that we plan for all kinds of contingencies, and we have looked at this. And if I can provide the options, in my opinion, and provide my best military advice. So I will tell you, I was here before as a deputy at AFCENT, so I know this long history of talking about no-fly zones in Syria. So we've done a number of planning efforts, and so I understand what it takes in order to do that. And if we got told to do it, that's exactly what we ended up doing. We go execute it.
Sir, before we go on to the next question, again, keeping my eye out for the broadcasters, if you could push back about 3 inches, we just get a cleaner shot of you. So if you just push back away from the, perfect, yes. That's great. All right, you're welcome, broadcasters out there. Thomas.
Hey, sir. Thomas Gibbons for the Washington Post. 2 questions. The first one is about your combat search and rescue capabilities and kind of what that looks like in Syria and Iraq. From what I understand, I mean, obviously you have aircraft over large pieces of ground that don't have any U.S. ground presence. Do you have the ability to retrieve pilots in a timely manner if they were shot down over Syria? I understand that your pararescue men are sometimes staging on the ground in Syria with their helicopters. Can you confirm that?
Well, with our CSAR capability, we have CSAR both based in Turkey, and we also have CSAR that's operating out of Iraq. And we're able to cover, well, actually out of Kuwait as well, and supporting the personnel recovery assets. And so we are able to go out and we posture ourselves from a notification timeline to be prepared to go. When we do missions that we think we have a higher risk, we posture a bit more. We don't necessarily. There are risks about where we put our our PR assets, and I won't get into details about where we put them, but we do move them around based on what's going on.
They move them around, and you say posturing. That means putting air crews, forward, on the ground. I'm not looking for exact locations, but just kind of a visual of what that looks like.
Well, we can do a number of things. We can either move them from the base they were at to another forward location. We can decrease their response time from going from several hours to a matter of a shorter time. Or we can have them airborne at the time to get them closer to where things go on. So there's a number of things we do to actually increase our posture to be more responsive.
General Barbara Starr from CNN. Thank you for bearing with us on the camera shot. We're having some difficulty in seeing you clearly, so we appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about the humanitarian relief operations that are now starting with the NGOs, the UN, and other aid organizations. The UN's indicated the World Food Program will begin airdrops over Deir ez-Zor in the coming days, if not sooner. Are you contemplating putting some aerial reconnaissance in that region or any region where this aid relief is coming, so you can keep an eye out for the safety of the humanitarian relief efforts?
Well, Barbara, we've not been asked to do that, but we have the capability to do it if asked to do so. But right now, I've not been tasked to do anything like that.
I understand that point. Sure, you haven't been asked, but because this is such a crisis humanitarian situation, Are you offering any options to do it? And you have certain flexibility as the commander within the theater, so do you think it's a good idea? Are you offering the option to suggest to anybody that you do it?
Well, we offered a number of different options, but in this particular case, we had not had direct discussions about it. We know it's coming, or the humanitarian aid is. We've heard about the airdrops. We've heard about some of the things that are going on. So, I and my staff think about it, but right now we haven't been asked to offer any support.
Follow up on a different question. You mentioned the airstrikes in central Mosul, and we haven't really heard anything in several weeks about striking any high-value targets. What's your assessment of the impact of airstrikes on the so-called high-value targets? Are they hiding more? Are they hiding in plain sight? Why haven't you in several weeks, frankly, been able to get to any of these people?
Well, every one of these high-value targets, they take time to build out. And, having done this business for a while, it's not one of those where you can flip a switch and go after a high-value target. So it really depends on the high-value target itself and how they present themselves. And so it does take time. And it's, sometimes just based on the environment and how they react to things. There may be there are peaks and valleys as we go after high value targets, and that's just the way our business is.
Hi, General. Tara Kopp with Stars and Stripes. Noticed recently that the bombers weren't in the mix in the airstrikes against OIR targets. Could you talk about, are the B-1s still out there, deployed, or did they rotate out? And then I have a couple other questions.
Now the B1s are rotated out, so they're not here right now. They've gone back to do some upgrades, and we fully expected that. We knew that was coming, and we actually have plenty of capacity with other platforms. The B1s is one of many platforms that we use in order to execute the air campaign.
So with them not being in the mix, have you lost any of the air power you're able to carry onto a target?
Well, we lose maybe a little flexibility. I mean, the B-1 is a workhorse. I actually had a chance to fly here back in January over Ramadi. And the fact that it can carry as many weapons as it can and stay airborne as long as it can, it does provide a great capability. But we're able to cover that with other, U.S. and coalition capabilities. And that's kind of part of our plan. We again, because we knew this was coming. And so we've, postured ourselves appropriately to be prepared for gaps from different platforms to fill those in, either with coalition or U.S. capabilities.
Anticipate a date where they return to the mix, or is this a long-term absence?
No, they will return to the mix, and it's like I said, they're going back for an upgrade. They're upgrading their cockpit. I've heard all about it when I had a chance to fly with them to get it a little more modern. So, they will be back. I fully expect it.
Thank you.
Move over here. Yes, Joe.
General Brown, this is Joe Tabit with Al Hurra. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has released a statement this morning saying that 38 Syrians were killed in U.S.-led strikes in Hasaka in the last 2 days. 38 people. Are you aware of that? Could you confirm that?
I have been made aware of the potential civilian casualties that have happened at Osaka, and like we do for every potential civilian casualty, we go through an assessment and to assess the credibility. At the same time as we're doing that, we look for ways that we're always trying to mitigate any civilian casualties. But now that we know about it or get the an allegation of a civilian casualty, we'll go through an assessment process and eventually investigation if required.
General Brown, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News. Once again, the Russian Foreign Ministry says that the Russians did not bomb the hospital in Syria. Are they right?
Well, I'll tell you, if the Russians didn't, there's only two people that are flying in the area, the Russians and the Syrians, because we don't fly there. And if I was putting money on it because the Russians are flying much more than the Syrians, it probably was the Russians. But I don't have a, direct intel to tell me it was the Russians, but I can guarantee it wasn't the coalition.
Sir, Otto Kreischer with Sea Power Magazine. You mentioned the number of nations in our coalition. There's been some questions back here, members of Congress, as to what contribution our allies are actually making in the air campaign. Could you give us kind of a breakdown on what share of the airstrikes or other sorties that our coalition members are making? And from a Navy perspective, what's the contribution of the Navy now we have a carrier back in the area?
Right. So from a coalition perspective, when you look at the bulk of the air power that's being provided is provided by the U.S. But when you look at from a strike perspective, about 80% of the strikes are done by the U.S. and it ebbs and flows for the Navy based on when the carrier is here. And so the carrier is here right now, so they're also part of the mix. And like I said, the strike that happened here in Mosul over the weekend was F-18s off the carrier that were part of that strike package. Now, we also get capabilities from the rest of our coalition partners in different forms and fashion, and whether it be ISR or tanker support or other ways that we use the coalition partners. So when I look at it, and we've done some analysis here recently, over time, what we've seen is our increase as other members of the coalition have come in. What we start to see is increase in their strike capability, their ISR capability, and their tanker capability. So the percentage numbers that the U.S. is doing versus what the coalition is doing, it's smaller U.S. and a little bit more coalition. And every one of the coalition members actually brings great capability, and not only in the air, but as we talking about intel and sharing information, that I find that personally of great value.
Christina?
Hi, General Brown. This is Christina Long from The Hill. What would the coalition's role be in monitoring the cessation of hostilities? And practically, how would you be able to tell whether Russia or the Syrian regime is targeting ISIS and al-Nusra versus moderate opposition rebels in Syria?
Well, we don't have a specific role or guidance to track the cessation of hostilities, but we actually kind of pay attention to what the Russians are doing on a regular basis through intel means. So through intel means we'll be able to tell where they're flying, where they might be employing ordnance, and have a pretty at least an idea. Now we won't be able to verify one way or another, but we will be able to tell through intel kind of where they're flying and where they may be employing ordnance, or if they're not employing ordnance.
Yes, Kevin.
Sir, Kevin Barron from Defense One. To go back to the coalition airstrikes, could you tell me, before this Brussels meeting in the counter-ISIL of the counter-ISIL countries, what types of capabilities did you want to receive from the new countries coming with new pledges? What did you get, or what are you hoping to get? So specifically, the Arab countries, Saudis, Gulf, in that world.
Right. So from an air power standpoint, the things that I've got plenty of strike capability and capacity, and personal recovery is one of the other areas that I'd be interested in, but also additional ISR, and with that ISR, the processing, exploitation, and dissemination. So it's not just the ISR; it's the intel backbone with that to actually do the analysis. So those are the key areas that for me personally, I asked for. What I have seen is when we different partner nations in some cases have increased their capability as far as where they strike. In some nations, like the Dutch, for example, just recently voted to start striking in Syria, so that adds a little more flexibility. I've been traveling here in the region and talked to some of our Gulf partners, and they've indicated that they're going to continue to increase their contributions and share time for based on the operation during Yemen. Matter of fact, the video I showed you and talked about the 8 nations, the second video, that strike happened here just a couple of days ago, and both Jordan and Saudi Arabia were part of that strike package.
For a couple more here.
Thank you, sir.
General, it's Andrew Tillman with Military Times. Back to your the communications that you and others have had with the Russians. Did I understand you correctly that you've basically notified the Russians of where the U.S. Special Operations troops are operating in northeastern Syria and have asked them to keep that area off limits to their strikes? And also, have you extended any kind of requests like that to include allies, non-American local ground forces that we're supporting? And my third piece of that is, what have you offered them in exchange? If you've asked them to not be striking in this particular area where our guys are operating, is there anywhere that they have asked you to return the favor, in a sense?
So the areas we've actually identified are areas where we do have coalition soft in Syria. So it's not specific areas, but fairly broad areas to maintain a level of safety for our forces that are there on the ground. Even before we did that, the Russians have actually outlined some areas, some of the airfields that they're worried about that they don't want us flying close to. And really, typically, we don't fly there anyway. So that hasn't been an issue. They've actually have come to us and they've asked a lot of things of us. Not specifically in areas not to fly or drop, but really looking for information more so than anything else to understand our operations. And that's not something I'm willing to share because of our own OPSEC reasons, and I want to make sure I minimize the risk to our crews.
Represent kind of an extension of the original MOU that you signed with them back in October, this sort of not just creating these radio frequencies for deconflicting the actual aircraft, but extending that to areas like no-go zones on the ground?
Well, I will tell you that we end up becoming the conduit for this, and so we're not the, all this is outside the MOU. And so that's the challenge we have with some of this, because we're probably one of the few areas we're able to pass information back and forth. And so some of that stuff, either a Russian request or a coalition request, actually go up through diplomatic channels versus coming through us. But we may be the first, first indication that there's a request coming, and that's the way that has played out. Back and forth with us and the Russians over the course that we've been making, having these phone calls with them since, since the MOU was signed.
Yes, sir. Brian Everstein with Air Force Magazine. Thanks for taking the time, and we look forward to seeing you speak next week. I had a question about how the air war has evolved. Earlier on, when operations started in Syria, General Carlisle said he wouldn't want to send an airstrike package into Syria without an F-22 quarterbacking that group. Is that how things are still operating? Are F-22s still deployed in support of the coalition?
Yeah, so we're still using F-22s to operate really across both Iraq and Syria to conduct strikes. We have I think our access to Turkey has actually given us some additional capability to be able to strike up into Syria, as well as getting our personal recovery forces postured into Turkey has actually given it. For me personally, it actually decreases some of our risk because we have our PR forces a little bit closer together. But we are using the F-22, but we're also using a lot of other platforms and capability from across the coalition to execute in Syria and in Iraq.
Thank you. Sir, this is Nancy Youssef from the Daily Beast. I wanted to ask two questions. One, if you could clarify your comments on what happened in Hasaka with the allegation of the civilian casualties. Can you tell us if there were coalition strikes in that area at the time that this accusation was made, and if so, what was the target? And then I have one other question.
Okay. I know I don't know the exact timing with the allegation. I do know that we've been striking in that area over the past several days. And so one of the things we do as part of our credibility assessment is to, get the information, figure out the time of when and location, and then we try to now go back and take a look at what we were doing at the same time and validate that we were actually executing during that time frame. And then that'll lead us down a path to see if it's a credible allegation and follow up with the investigation. And so, at this point, because we're just now becoming aware of it, we'll start that whole process for the credibility assessment. We do that for every single one of these if there's an allegation of some sort of a civilian casualty.
I wanted to to follow up on your comments on Aleppo. If I heard you correctly, you said one of the reasons you're not focusing on Aleppo is because ISIS is not there. And you also spoke about the communications that's happening between the coalition and Russia. And I was wondering if you could help us understand what responsibility does the U.S. military and the coalition writ large feel to those local forces on the ground who have received funding and weapons and support from the coalition who are now coming under attack from Russia? Is there any talk of doing something defensively on their behalf? I'm having a hard time understanding what those forces who have worked with the United States and the coalition should expect in the face of this relentless attack by the Russians over the past week in Aleppo.
Well, the forces that we were supporting were really north of Aleppo, up around the Mara line and the Manbij pocket. So, and that's the folks that we're supporting, and we're doing strikes in their support against their fight against Daesh. And I will tell you, it's very complicated in northwest Syria, and it's gotten more complicated as time has gone on. But really, our focus is to support them in their fight against Daesh. And what we don't see them is really those forces actually fighting towards the regime or towards the Russians. So our focus is in support of them in their fight against Daesh.
Can I ask a quick clarification? Yeah. Great. Hey, General Brown, this is Courtney Cuby from NBC News again. I just want to make sure I understand your answer to Andrew Tillman's question about the conversations with the Russians. So just to be clear, you're saying that the United States has notified the Russians of where U.S. Special Forces are in Syria, in broad regions. And when did that happen? Did you notify them prior to the soft guys going in or after? And then do you have any kind of specific assurances from them that they're not going to? I mean, you won't tell the American people where their special operators are in Syria for security reasons, but you're telling the Russians, the people who we've spent weeks listening to how the Russians are supporting Assad and how they're destroying the situation on the ground there for the coalition, essentially. But you've told them where there are U.S. Special Forces operating right now. So do you have any assurances that they're not going to provide that information to ISIS or leak that information? Or
Well, I mean, I don't have any assurances really from the Russians. But we told them these areas that we have coalition forces that, in general areas where we have coalition forces, that we don't want them to strike there, because all it's going to do is escalate things. And I don't think the Russians want to escalate against the coalition. And that was pretty evident to me when the MOU was signed, because they were very concerned about safety of flight, just like I was. And we don't run aircraft together. And so it's really just to maintain the safety for our forces that are both in the air, in this case on the ground.
Russians, did you inform the Russians prior to the soft guys going in, or did you inform them after they arrived?
I don't remember the exact date or time frame associated, but it was all kind of real close together.
Was it actually the KAC? Who was it that informed the Russians that they were there, and I guess on what authority? Because there was a while here where we were asking the question over and over whether the Russians would be informed of where the U.S. troops were in Syria, and we never got a satisfactory answer that they would be. So this seems to be the first time someone's confirming that for us. So on whose authority was that notification made to the Russians?
That was done during higher level channels, not through us. I mean, we knew about it, so it wasn't necessarily through the KAC. It was done, through diplomatic channels, for the way I understand it.
Thank you very much.
General Brown, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to having you back here in the briefing room. And again, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I kept moving around. It's kind of with the delay. It's kind of tough to figure out where I'm supposed to sit, and a little bit of the audio issues we had as we got started. But again, appreciate your good questions, and I look forward to doing this here in the future. Thanks, Peter.
Can I clarify that? Because I'd like to amplify that. The Memorandum of Understanding covers flight safety. as you can imagine, with regard to special operators, when the decision was made to put special operators into Syria, there was a formal request made, geographic areas, specifically, not pinpoint locations, to protect the safety of our people. This was a decision made, a request made out of an abundance of safety for our operators on the ground. And this was done, again, geographical areas writ large, not specific locations and not times.
So provinces as opposed to cities?
I'm not going to get into the details, but this
They
was...
seem to be avoiding it. We have been told all along that the U.S. guys were going to be in the north, in northern Syria,
I'm
and the
not gonna
Russians
get
are
in-
not avoiding northern Syria. with
I'm
strikes.
not going to get into details other than to say that there was an effort made to protect the safety of our people from the risk of Russian airstrikes, and that those steps were taken, and those so far have been honored. And so again, I'm not going to discuss locations, but in broad geographic terms, that step was taken.
Well, why weren't we told about it earlier?
We are protecting the safety of U.S. troops in harm's way and taking every step we can, maintaining operational security.
No,
And
why weren't we were informed that the Russians were told about the broad geographic areas to stay away from?
this is something that was done, again, out of an abundance of caution.
No, I realize that.
Yeah.
Why weren't we told? Because we've been asking about it, I guess, right?
Was it just in the past couple days that the Russians were?
I'm not going to give you the exact timeline, but I'm not aware of a question that's come to me on this topic specifically since this decision was made.
Was that part of any kind of larger discussion in terms of other things that we would do to provide safety for their forces? Or was that just a unilateral request made?
This was a unilateral request.
So it was outside the MOU, that's what he just said. So
Correct.
when you talk about it was the MOU, then that would indicate.
The MOU deals with flight safety specifically, but there's also, as you know, in these conversations over the MOU, there's a line of communication that's maintained with the Russians to maintain flight safety. And so I just want to convey to you that this was done out of an abundance of safety for our special operators.
Was there a close call or something, and that's
No.
why?
No, this was
Why
done.
not do this from the beginning? The
This-
MOU was signed several months ago.
Because the MOU deals specifically with flight safety issues, and that's the limits of the MOU. And this was done outside the MOU, again, to maintain the safety of our special operators. And I would think that people would encourage us to take every step we can to maintain the safety of...
When it was done, was this during the time of the MOU?
This is since the decision was made to put special operators into Syria, that the decision was made to...
Before they went in or after they went in?
It was done, I'm not going to give you the timeline, but it was done in a way to... I'm going to tell you, it was done in a way to maintain the safety and the operational security of their operations. So I'm not going to tell you when and where they went in, and that's not what we provided to the Russians as well.
And who did it? Was it Kerry? Was it... Who did it?
It was done between the Department of Defense and the Russian Ministry of Defense.
What other off-the-book stuff have we done with the Russians outside of the MOU for
I'm
force
explaining,
protection?
I'm explaining specifically this one instance. Other than that, our military-to-military communications with the Russians have been regarding flight
Was
safety.
it done by Secretary Carter?
Secretary Carter was aware of this, and so
Can we say who did it?
I can just assure you that we've had negotiations here at the highest levels, Department of Defense, to maintain the safety. The Secretary was aware of this, and again, it was done to maintain the safety of our special operators on the ground.
Is it in writing? Is this like the MOU was a proper document? Is this arrangement that you're talking about in writing?
I'm going to share with you the details that I am right now, that this request was made of the Russians, and up to this point, they have honored this request. And we have maintained
Say if it's in writing or not.
I'm not going to get into the details of it.
Peter, how is this not cooperating with the Russians? Because when we asked in the
This
past...
is a request on our part of the Russians.
And how is it
And
not
that's-
cooperating with the Russians? I mean, that was the answer we were given before, that we weren't cooperating with the Russians, and that's why we weren't asking them to not target certain areas.
These are our special operators on the ground. We have made clear to you all that we're going to do everything we can to maintain the safety of these troops, as I think the American people would expect. This was a step we took to try and maintain their safety in a dangerous situation. And again, this was a request that we made of the Russians outside the scope of the MOU, and they have honored it up to this point.
Just to be clear, this includes the area of operation for these special operators as well as their support base.
I'm not going to get into the details, Tom, but this is a...
You told the Russians, you can't tell us?
I'm going to tell you that what I just told you, which we provided a geographical area that we asked them to stay out of because of the risk to U.S. forces.
So the general just said that the Russians had asked for a variety of things from us.
Correct.
Have we rejected all of those, or just not talking about
We
them?
have a memorandum of understanding in place with the Russians, and that constitutes our cooperation with the Russians on a military-to-military basis.
He seemed to indicate, I'll have to look back at the tape, but he seemed to indicate that in this discussion that the Russians have asked about, well, we have, airfields here, we'd like you to stay away from there, and other things. Is that...
Again,
that doesn't sound like it would be a part of the MOU. That would also be something that was...
That's correct. We have a line of communication, as you know. We've had secure video conferences with the Russians, in which we've talked about the terms of the MOU specifically. And there have been requests made by the Russians that we have not been willing to agree to. And again, we made this one particular request.
So is the U.S. honoring any requests?
We are honoring the terms. We are honoring the terms of the memorandum of understanding.
Is the U.S. honoring any other requests that the Russians have made outside the MOU?
David, I'll go back to where I've said from the start. Terms of our agreement, military-to-military agreement with Russia, is within the boundaries of the MOU, and that's where it stands at this point.
Does the request that was made of the Russians to stay away from these geographic areas, did that also include U.S.-backed groups?
This is a specific request for geographical area with regard to U.S. troops specifically. So I got time for, I'll take two more and then I got to run. Tara?
Just to follow up, so the Russians have explicitly agreed to stay away from these areas even though the U.S. did not then honor their, I guess, counter request?
We made a request in this instance, and they have honored that request, and I'll leave it at that. Louis?
A couple of weeks ago, you issued a statement talking about how there was a new video conference that had occurred as part of this MOU. Were some of these topics that we're talking about now raised during that video conference? And going back to Andy's question, the Russian airfields that we've been told to be aware of, does that include Hasaka, this new facility that the Russians in the Northeast have been said to be working on as well?
First of all, again, the secure video conferences, there have been several at this point, and I'm not going to get into the details of each and every one of those conferences. Again, we've conveyed this particular request, and it's been honored up to this point. And in terms of the airfields, again, I'll refer back to what General Brown said, but I'm not sure exactly specifically what airfields he's referring to, but we're not flying in those areas where the Russians are operating most significantly. So I don't think it's been an issue.
One clarification?
Yes.
Peter? So we have the MOU, which deals with flight safety.
Yes.
And we have this one request about the soft guys on the ground.
Yes.
There is nothing else outside of the MOU and the soft guys that has been requested or honored or requested back and forth. That's what you're saying?
There have been, again, the MOU frames our agreement with the Russians. That's correct.
On flight safety.
On flight safety.
And then we have the soft guys, which is this thing outside of the MOU.
Yeah.
And you're saying those are the only two things in play here. There's been no other requests that you're not talking to or talking about or anything else outside of those two things.
Detailing to you the MOU and the specific instance with regard to safety of our special operators, and there's nothing else, again, that goes beyond those two things. And that's the limit of our, the MOU is the limit of our cooperation with the Russians on a military-to-military basis. And I mention, again, this one instance in which we've asked for the safety of our special operators, a geographical area. We asked them, again, as part of the air campaign, to not engage in that particular geographical area. And that's for the safety of our special operators. And we think it's a reasonable request to maintain, again, make sure that these folks in harm's way are as protected as they possibly can be. And we think it was a reasonable request to make. Thanks, everybody. I got to run. Lucas, I got to run. I'm sorry.